Hey guys, Crondis here today with another episode of A RuneScape Discussion. Today we are going to be talking about an issue that just came up regarding the Menaphos Library Lorebooks. Mod Rally and some other JMods have said that they are interpretationally canon. Uh, there's been a lot of issues surrounding all this, so today I've got joining me a good friend of mine, new to the channel, AesirWarrior. Hello.
Right. Hi.
So,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, Crondis bribed me by convincing me that he wouldn't proc his task, so I couldn't resist.
Ah, yes. I've got Lime getting me my 32 croc ices. Fetch me my croc ices, you slaves. Alright, so, yeah, let's just start off with saying Lorebooks may or may not be canon according to interpretation, kind of. This isn't really any new information. It's kind of always been this way for Lorebooks. The only exception I could think of is like maybe memories for the Majrat and stuff like that. But even that could be slightly off, I guess. But it's
Yeah. I mean, it's a proven fact that memories can change based on your experiences.
exactly, and it's all personal experiences. You could remember something and think it happened a certain way, but you didn't really have all the knowledge and background of it. Um, but yeah, this isn't really any new information. I'm not quite sure why people are too surprised by this.
I think one of the main reasons people are upset by this in particular is because there's been this kind of drought recently, and people are hungry for more answers. So when they're faced with new, exciting information and then told that it might be fictional, it feels pointless to them, even though fiction isn't necessarily pointless.
I can see that. Um, yeah, there has been slight less lore coming out recently just because of expansion taking 6 months to get started. And there's another issue there now that we've learned, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. Um, but I don't know, I feel like anytime we get lore books, this should be expected. I mean, the great case that you brought up was the Avernic book when we were talking on Twitter. Like, that book was actually designed. We knew before it even came out that it was written to be wrong.
Well, one small correction there. It was Avernic who came up with the Avernic book thing. I just copied him.
Okay. Um, there was, I believe there was another one you said. Oh, the wise old man. How he still believes there's three gods and refuses to say more.
Yeah, there's. I mean, originally that was just old lore that only three gods created Gillinor, but as lore has progressed, that that wasn't just completely retcon. There are still characters that believe that only three gods created the world. The most infamous would be the wise old man, who gets all angry and upset if you even mention Ceres or Armadillo or any of the other gods. Uh, and while you could say that's pointless because it doesn't reflect the truth, it does tell us about the gods' followers, what they believe, and of course, belief influences action and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. A big example that you also pointed out of the belief, you know, uh, enhancing actions is the Lumbridge Ceradoman Church. They believe that Ceradoman created the world. You talk to the priest and he still tells you that, even though you know far ahead, and even in old lore you knew that wasn't necessarily right.
Yeah, as far back as Temple of Icov, I think the idea that Samrak was Margaret was introduced.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Wasn't that the first dropped in a? Was it a God letter? I don't know.
It might have
That
it
was
might have been. I don't really remember.
yeah, that was a long time ago. Um, but yeah, it just shows that characters in game aren't always correct, and that goes straight to lore books because you have to remember these lore books are in universe are being written by people, and people are not infallible. They make mistakes and they might know wrong correction or wrong information.
And to me, that's actually more interesting than if they were correct, because they have motivations for potentially making this stuff up, or maybe there's a reason they believe something that isn't true. And if anything, that just adds to Jagex's world building.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it gives you more of a sense that these aren't infallible people that know everything about a specific part of the world. They do actually feel more human when you open them up to, you know, the ability to be wrong.
In particular, this update introduced myths. There's the myth about Tumikin fighting the wind.
Yeah.
While it's not particularly original, it does. Okay, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but yeah, it does tell us something about the people who worship these gods.
Right. I believe it's copied off of a old child story about the sun fighting the wind or something like that, or the sky.
Yeah, it's a old fable about the sun fighting the northern wind, I believe.
Yeah. Um, but it just goes to another point of world building and making it an actual, almost lifelike universe. These people, they have their myths, they have their folklore. Not everything you write down is necessarily true. I mean, in the real world, we have things like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are completely fictional. But if you take everything you read as being straight fact and, you know, you can't dispute it, well, there's a lot of things in those books that would be really weird.
Yeah, I mean, history is just built on a pillar of lies, and the farther back you go, the harder it is to say what actually happened. And it's just a sign of good writing, in my opinion, if that's true for a fictional universe as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think it, like I said earlier, it definitely makes it feel more like a living, breathing universe if they have these things and everything that they say is not 100% fact. Because that's not what you find in the real world. I can't go up to someone and ask them a question and expect that every single question I ask them to know every single detail to every answer.
But even if these stories are fictional, for example, uh, Arachnea's tale or whatever the spider's name was, then uh, it still most likely has some facts. For example, how would the author know that Eladin is infertile, uh, and things like that? And I mean, in the real world, if you read a fictional novel about World War II, the actual story is obviously going to be fictional, but real event. And yeah.
Right, I mean that's a really good example. We have movies all the time about wars that are fictional stories about true time periods and events. I could write a story about Crondis and Eclairon, but that doesn't make it necessarily true that that actually happened.
And I mean, even if we look at, let's say we look at Arachnia's tale again, let's just for a moment imagine that it's all fictional. It's blasphemy to slander Aladdinus in such a way, and certainly the motivations of that author is definitely important. I mean, just because a story is fictional does not mean it's not canon. All these stories are canon; they exist in universe.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we were saying, is you have to remember that in universe, this book was written by a canonical character. It's just whether the information that that character knew is correct or not.
And really, that's not a new thing at all. You said it when we introduced the topic. Virtually all lore books in the game have the potential to be fictional, are written by. I think the main reason this in particular has become a controversy is because Modrowley came out and said, remember that this isn't necessarily true. But the thing is, mods have also said that about loads of other lore books at different points throughout RuneScape's history.
Right. I think another thing that may have gotten this in particular to be under people's skin is the fact that it was player-written books for the most part, even though some were JMod books.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine for some people it could feel a bit that their story isn't true, and in that way they could think that Jagex have screwed over the players. I remember one tweet in particular called it one of the worst events, one of the worst community events Jagex have ever done, or something like that, for that reason.
No, the worst community event Jagex ever did was on the Golden Path, but we're not going to get into that. Yeah, people just have to remember that even JMod books, like we said, the Avernic book, they're written with the assumption that it could be correct or it could be completely wrong. You always have to remember that, and that goes for even outside books, like we said, like talking to characters. They could be completely wrong about what they're talking about. People aren't infallible, books are not infallible, and that's really the end of the day on the subject.
I think part of the issue could be that even though Jagex has said several times that these books are biased, there's not that many examples of lore books that are objectively false. There's always something in them where you could say, oh, but that's true and that's true. And this is one of the first times we've really gotten a purely fictional story. The only other example I could think of is the laws and history stories about Samuel Scourgewell, which are probably very exaggerated.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of actually just a couple of the lores and histories, honestly, all of them could have been interpreted as being slightly wrong. I think the only one that could be not would be like the Rhinebound Letters and Demonheim Asunder, and maybe Arav.
Yeah, all books could be wrong, but I think there's so few examples of books that are actually wrong that when a mod comes out and says, hey, this could be wrong, that it's sort of people get caught off guard.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
no, that completely makes sense. I mean, for a long stench there, we did have books that were, written with the assumption that they were right. Farther back than memories, even though that's a good example of, what could or, has a better chance of being right, I suppose. Uh, but books before then, you were kind of under the assumption that they were right. But you should still always, like we said, remember that there is the possibility that anything that is ever written is wrong, even if you go back and look at the older books that at the time we assumed were right.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why people want more answers. They want to understand more about this world, and when fiction gets introduced, it could make it more confusing. But on the other hand, it also makes it, like we said, it means you have to do a lot more critical thinking about your sources, just like in real life, because you have to consider what if I'm making a Ladinus theory? Is this book correct or not? And you have to evaluate that, and it adds a whole new layer to lore discussion.
Yeah, you have to remember there is going to be fiction in our fictional world of RuneScape.
I mean, it's a bit weird that fictional world somehow means it's worthless, but all of RuneScape is fictional, and I mean, we don't see it as worthless.
Right. Alright, well, I think that's kind of it on the topic.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to be in this video.
Yeah, sure. We'll try to get you back as soon as we can. I've been Crondis. This has been Aesir. We do have some videos coming. We halfway recorded the Menaphos video, and then we had some technical issues. So hopefully we will be able to pick it up. Now including the Magister lore, along with all of the library books, as soon as we can get a chance. I also have a couple videos scripted, and hopefully we'll be able to get those recorded soon-ish. Alright, I'll see you guys later.